the wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations. And grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one toward another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This meeting of the Honourable Senate for Friday, the 11th day of December 2020 is called to order. Statements by ministers. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following. Ministry paper number 80 of 2020 entitled Cabinet Agenda Issues dated September 21 and 28 of 2020. Ministry paper number 81 of 2020 entitled The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem Community Zone, Social Interventions, dated September 1 to 17 and December 3, 2020. Ministry paper number 83 entitled The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Denham Town Community Zone Social Intervention, dated December 3, 2020. Ministry paper number 83 of 2020 entitled The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Augustown Community Zone Social Intervention, dated December 3, 2020. Ministry paper number 84 of 2020 entitled The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Greenwich Town Community Zone Social Intervention, dated December 3, 2020. Annual Report of the Consumer Affairs Commission for the financial year 2018-2019 and 2019-2020. Annual Report of the Fair Trading Commission for the financial year 2014-2015. Special reports of investigation into allegation of impropriety and irregularity in the signing of checks by Ms. Shernet Horton for the financial year 2014-2015. Special report of investigation concerning allegation of lack of transparency and fairness in the issuance of import permits by the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries for the importation of chicken backs and chicken necks. Auditor General's Performance Audit Report on the management system for maintenance of parochial roads for Kingston and St. Andrew Municipal Corporations. Auditor General Compendium Report of Performance Audits of Management Systems for Farm and Parochial Roads. The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Mount Salem Community and Environs in the Parish of St. James Zone, Extension of Period of Operation Number 6 Order 2020 and its resolution. The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Denham Town Community Zone, Extension of Period of Operation Number 6 Order 2020 and its resolution. The Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Measures, the Augustown Community Zone, Extension of Period of Operation Number 3 Order 2020, and its resolution. And the law reforms zones of special operations, special security and community development measures, the Greenwich Town Community Zone, extension of period of operation number 3 order 2020 and its resolution.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives.
The following is a message from the House of Representatives. To the Honourable Senate, I have the honour to advise the Honourable Senate that on the 8th day of December 2020, the House of Representatives agreed to the Senate's amendment to a bill entitled An Act to Repeal the Dogs Liability for Injuries by Act and to provide for liability for attacks by dog and for connected matters, and further amended the bill as follows. In Clause 7D, as amended by the Senate, by deleting the word 18 and substituting, therefore, the word 14. I also have the honor to advise the Honourable Senate that on the 8th day of December 2020, the following bills were passed in the House of Representatives. A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Dangerous Dogs Act, a bill entitled An Act to Amend the Evidence Act, and a bill entitled An Act to Amend the National Housing Trust Act. Signed, Marisa Dalrymple Philibert, MP, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Petitions? Sir.
Mr. President, I beg to signal my willingness to take charge of the bills.
Thank you.
A bill.
Sorry.
Just for clarity on this, could the minister indicate to us what is the amendment from the House? Is it stated anywhere so we could pick it up?
I can read it for you. I can read it again for you, Senator. In Clause 7D, as amended by the Senate, you delete the word 18 and the word 14 was substituted therefore. All right. A bill entitled the Dangerous Drugs Amendment Act 2020, read the first time. A bill entitled the National Housing Trust Amendment Special Provisions Act 2020, read the first time. And other one. And a bill entitled the Evidence Act, read the second time.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of second reading of the Evidence Amendment Act, the Dangerous Drugs Amendment Act, and the NHT Amendment Act. But I also beg leave, Mr. President, for us to take the amendment which has been sent to us by the House in respect of the Dogs Liability for Attacks Act 2020.
Thank you, Madam President, Madam Leader. Petitions? Yes, that goes without saying. Leave is granted to you so to do. Thank you.
Mr. President, having noted that the sole amendment accepted based on the assurances which I had given to bring the three matters of concern to the Senate to the attention of the Minister of Justice for his discussion with the technical team and consideration, that the sole amendment which was accepted was the adjustment of the age to be inserted in the defense in Clause 7D, which ensures that the defense of provocation is only available for children above the age of 14. The age of 14 being the age up to which the court would still assess criminal responsibility. The age of 12 being that of presumption of non-responsibility. 14 allows the court to assess as well. And it was felt that that would be the appropriate balance. The request had been made by the leader of opposition business in the Senate, and it was accepted by the Minister of Justice. I would ask that in the interest of efficiency that we agree and accept the amendment to the bill as sent from the House of Representatives. With your leave, Mr. President.
You want to do that now or in public business?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay.
That is a request.
Thank you. Members would have heard the proposal of the Honourable Minister as it relates to an amendment to the Dogs Liability Act. As pointed out, the amendment was one that was proposed by this Honourable Senate, in that the Minister had given her undertaking to seek the amendment, which has been granted. So I'm going to put the amendment. Those in favour? Aye. Against? Thank you. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally, questions and answers to questions, motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice, motions relating to the sitting of the Senate, motions for leave to introduce bills, the presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained, public business. Leader.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, it is intended today to take the debate, on the Shipping Amendment Act 2020, which was tabled 3 weeks ago, and which we believe is an important development to be signaled in respect of the protection of the working conditions in which our seafarers conduct their living. Mr. President, indeed, the bill before us is appropriately taken today, noting that it was only yesterday that we celebrated Human Rights Day, again under the theme, Recover Better, Stand Up for Human Rights. And indeed, I wish to reiterate the commitment of the government of Jamaica to promote and protect the fundamental rights, freedoms, and dignity of all its citizens. And indeed, this bill does allow us to stand up for the rights and dignity of seafarers by incorporating provisions of the Maritime Labour Convention 2006, to which we have acceded. Mr. President, we agree with Article 4 of the Convention that every seafarer has the right to a safe and secure workplace that complies with safety standards, that every seafarer has a right to fair terms of employment, that every seafarer has a right to decent working and living conditions on board, and every seafarer has a right to health protection, medical care, welfare measures, and other forms of social protection. The shipping industry, Mr. President, is a global enterprise. Ships transport more than 11 billion tons of goods around the world each year. And indeed, by 2019, the shipping trade had reached a value of over 14 trillion United States dollars. Importantly for us in Jamaica, we not only have trading cargo ships plying our waters, but cruise shipping is also a major earner for Jamaica and an employer of Jamaican citizens. Mr. President, over the years, Jamaica has strategically moved to increase its competitiveness in the maritime industry, and a range of incentives are in fact available to ships flying the Jamaican flag. For instance, we've offered incentives to large passenger ships to home port in Jamaica, and we are hoping that this will be a business which increases. And importantly, attractive incentives are in particular offered to ships that employ Jamaican seafarers. So having made our maritime environment more attractive, Mr. President, we must ensure that every single seafarer on Jamaican ships is treated with the dignity they deserve. The thousands of workers, or rather persons who work on board ships and travel the open seas for months at a time, providing a variety of tasks, including entertainment and food services. However, Mr. President, under the current Shipping Act, only the crew, meaning those responsible for navigation, are accorded certain rights, and other workers are left to either depend on the kindness of employers or, of course, depending on the nationality of the flagship, their observance of the Convention for all workers on their ships. But clearly a situation in which one set of employees have a right and others do not is not an enabling environment. And this bill seeks to make better provisions for the maintenance of standards and behaviors within the shipping industry, nationally and internationally, promoting respect for the dignity of each person, notwithstanding the role they perform on a ship. The new definition of seafarer and the accordant rights affects this particular matter, but I will deal with that further on. Mr. President, this bill protects Jamaican seafarers in two broad circumstances. This is how it operates in respect of its provisions. It will, through this act and through these amendments, protect Jamaicans when they're aboard a foreign flagged ship in Jamaican waters. So the terms will apply whether or not the ship's flag state is party to the convention. And a flag state is where a ship is registered in a particular jurisdiction. So they sail under the flag of that particular jurisdiction. Which is, where Jamaicans are aboard Jamaican ships, wherever they are in the world. So whatever waters they're in, once a ship is Jamaican, Jamaican workers are protected on that ship or will be properly protected when these amendments are passed. And this is very important for us because Jamaican ships tend to cross-trade and in fact rarely call in Jamaican ports. Mr. President, the Shipping Amendment Act 2020 shall of course be read and taken as one with the principal legislation, the 1998 Shipping Act, and it will amend some outdated modalities that are provided for in the statute. The new clauses, the amendments are the basis for reform, restructuring, and transformation of the shipping industry, and they are consistent with international trends. So, as I alluded to earlier, there are new definitions of seafarer. So the word seaman will be removed from the bill, and you will now be defined as a seafarer. And a seafarer will include crew and everyone who works on the ship. It won't just be those who are responsible for navigation. And the definition of crew agreement is also being deleted as well and being replaced with the seafarer employment agreement, which is a broader and a more modern and appropriate instrument for the protection of workers' rights. And I suspect that this is going to be another day in which my colleague in well-coordinated khaki mask and suit shall be extending his arms beyond the plexi screen to me this morning as well. So I look forward to the moment because indeed the provisions of this bill are absolutely welcomed, and I know they will be welcomed by all on both sides. So, Mr. President, tied to the issues of the Seafarer Crew Agreement and Seafarer Employee Agreement is the wider definition, as I indicated. And to be clear for the record, this means that the definition of seafarer now includes any person engaged by or on behalf of the owner of a ship, and includes persons employed in the hospitality division of the passenger ships. And we know that we have many members of our population who participate in that arena, and we indeed expect that with the passage of this act that we will have more, as I will explain later. But this is truly important, and certainly Jamaicans working on cruise ships will benefit immensely from these provisions. So the framework for the engagement and welfare of seafarers has been enhanced with the addition of provisions governing collective bargaining agreements, Senator Brown, and established the competent authority for the Act as the Maritime Authority. And the Act also empowers the Minister to grant exemptions by way of publication in the Gazette of a category of ships for the provisions of the Principal Act dealing with the engagement and welfare of seafarers. So I'll explain that the category of ships being contemplated for this would be more the tugboat and the pilot boat, because they clearly only have a very limited motion out. They don't actually leave port. They, or they're not at sea for long periods of time. So the regime for management of workers on the ship would need to be different, given that you will recall that the bill actually deletes the provision for the tonnage of the ships to be the criteria based on which the law will apply. So now it will apply to all ships. The appropriate balance that has been put forward is for the minister to be able to exempt any ship which appropriately should not have the same requirements. So that is the limitation to the exemption, or the reason for the right to exempt on this part, under this part. So, Mr. President, the bill requires the Jamaican ships of 500 gross tons or more to have on board a current maritime labor certificate and a declaration of maritime labor compliance, again, in demonstration of compliance with Maritime Labor Convention. And this declaration of Maritime Convention, the latter document to which I just spoke, and the Maritime Labor Certificate, they will be issued under the Shipping, Welfare of Seafarers and Maritime Labor Compliance and Certificate Regulations 2020 made under the Act. And I understand that these will not be regulations long in coming, as I know that this is an issue which the Senate has had many issues with across different pieces of legislation. But the legislation will allow also, Mr. President, an inspector to board any foreign ship on arrival to verify that there is in force in respect of the ship the appropriate certificates, and B, that the living and working conditions of seafarers engaged to work on the ship correspond with the certificate. So they don't just look on the certificate and take it as a given. They will, under this Act, in Jamaican waters, have the right to inspect and ensure that what you say is in fact what you do, and the two are the same. So the ship may be detained under this Act if they don't have a certificate, or if the circumstances require rectification. Mr. President, additionally, the amendments provide additional protection for workers by ensuring that those under 18 are not assigned to engage in dangerous work without proper supervision. So a seafarer who is under 18 may exist. You may have a seafarer under 18, but he should not be, or she should not be, engaged in the engine room unless under supervision, nor in night work, which is defined under the Act, unless with the permission of the authority for a recognized training program, because we recognize that as our young seafarers and our young trainees, they need experience as part of their qualification and certification process, and therefore they are allowed to work on ships towards this goal. But indeed, it must be managed in a way that protects them, that keeps them safe, even as they pursue their goal of a life at sea. So, Mr. President, night work has been defined, as I just referred to, as works between the hours of 10 o'clock in the evening and 5 in the morning. And the question of whether work is likely to jeopardize the health or safety of a person under the age of 18 for the purposes of this Act is in fact a matter to be guided by the ministry responsible, or the minister responsible for labor within Jamaica. So, Mr. President, under this Act, the owner is liable for medical care and burial expenses, and it provides that the owner of a Jamaican ship is responsible for the health, protection, and medical care of all seafarers working on board the ship, and such medical care shall be comparable to that available to workers on shore. And indeed, the owner is liable for all the costs related to medical care in respect of sickness or injury between the date of engagement and repatriation of the seafarer, where such sickness or injury is attributable to the seafarer's employment on board. So owners will also be liable for sickness or injury which results in the incapacity of the seafarer to work, and for reasonable burial expenses of any seafarer who dies aboard the ship or ashore during the period of the seafarer's engagement. Mr. President, while the bill provides protection for the property of an injured or deceased seafarer which was left on board a ship, the owner is also required to just take reasonable measures to safeguard that property and return it to the seafarer or the seafarer's next of kin in the appropriate case. And there's certain circumstances under which a ship owner may not be reliable for injury or sickness of a seafarer. They are also outlined in the bill. The bill provides for financial security for abandoned seafarers in the form of insurance, in which instance a certificate of insurance is required to be carried on board the ship and to be conspicuously displayed. Mr. President, while this bill is geared towards life on board, we must also just look at the economic benefit that comes as a result of this bill. The fact is that it will redound to the benefit not only of recruitment agencies, but to Jamaicans seeking to work on ships, because there are shipping lines who will only accept employees where it is that they are nationals of states that have domestic legislation which requires them to abide by the provisions of the convention. There are shipping lines whose standards are maintained in that way. It's a part of their insurance and risk management, etc. So passing this act today will take us much closer to removing that recruitment hurdle and unlocking even more opportunities for our people when indeed we know supply chains have had some disruptions during COVID, but trade indeed does continue, and we want our young men and women who want a life at sea to be able to seek opportunities at sea. And indeed, when the cruise shipping industry again is restored to life after COVID, then we want our workers to take advantage of opportunities in that area as well. So, Mr. President, the aims, as I've indicated, are to not only significantly and positively impact the rights and living conditions of our seafarers, but it will enable us to meet our international obligations as we have acceded to the convention. We acceded in, I believe, 2018, and it will also open new channels for economic growth and development. I will just go through some of the proposed amendments, Mr. President, although I've given a broad summary of what is achieved by the bill. I will just indicate, of course, as is always the case, Section 2 comprises the definition section, and I've alluded to some of the key definitions already. Mr. President, in respect of Part 7, in respect of the interpretation of Part 7, the framework has been enhanced with the addition of provisions governing collective bargaining agreements, and it is in here that the bill establishes a competent authority for the act as a maritime authority. I've already explained the wider definition of the seafarer and how it is that that will operate practically. Mr. President, I'm just running through. I've already spoken to the exemptions that the minister may grant and the circumstances in which those will operate, as well as the labor certification and compliance regime, which is also being included. There is an amendment, Mr. President. Clause 4 amends Section 116 of the Principal Act, and it is deleting 116(2), and that is the provision that provides, or rather that requires ships of above 100 gross tons to have crew agreements. We are now requiring all ships to have seafarer employment agreements for the crew, no matter the gross tonnage of the vessel. So I'd referred to that earlier. This is a relevant amendment. The amendment of Section 117 of the Principal Act will include the further requirements to be contained in the seafarer employment agreement. It provides for the inclusion of the name and address of the owner of the ship, the formula for the calculation of wages, the amount of annual paid leave to which a seafarer would be entitled, conditions of termination, health and social security benefits of the seafarer, and of course the reference to collective bargaining agreements and the right to repatriation. Mr. President, amendment of Section 20 of the Principal Act will delete the restriction on employment agreements to ships engaged in international voyages and extends the requirement for such agreements to foreign ships operating in Jamaican waters. So this is very important. The clause also provides for seafarers to sign their employment agreements after they have had the opportunity to review them and to seek legal advice if they are so able. It requires that the seafarers also be provided with copies of their signed agreements. So this, as you can see, are some fundamentals that are important to empower an individual that might not otherwise feel empowered to be able to exercise rights under their terms of service. Mr. President, Section 121 of the Principal Act is being amended with the inclusion of a requirement for the master to make available for inspection a copy of the seafarer's employment agreement. So this is their standard agreement where a request is made by the seafarer or the inspector or a person duly authorized by a competent authority to conduct inspections of ships. Mr. President, Section 127 of the Principal Act it deals with the matter of the persons under the age of 18 and the fact that they may not be engaged in an engine room unless under supervision, in night work unless with the permission of the authority for a recognized training program, or as a cook or any other type of work likely to jeopardize their health or safety. And I've already explained the definition of night work. Section 133 of the Principal Act, Mr. President, is also amended by providing a regular schedule of payments. Instead of waiting to be paid at the completion of a voyage, which might occur, or might be the terms of contracts for many persons who work on large ships. Instead of having to wait several months, the clause provides that seafarers shouldn't be paid at longer than monthly intervals. So they might be paid at shorter intervals if there is some such agreement that is made. But in any event, they must be provided with a monthly account of wages due to them and any deductions made from that. So provisions also made for seafarers to allot a portion of their wages for remittance to their families or dependents or legal beneficiaries at specified intervals, which is again sort of a look at the broader concept of what improves the living conditions and the working conditions of an individual. And the owner of the ship is, however, allowed to recover the reasonable cost of any remittance facility that is provided to seafarer. Section 139 of the Principal Act is also amended to delete the reference as the master of the ship as the person from whom a registrar of seafarers should seek to recover traveling and other expenses associated with settling a wage dispute. And Section 140 is also amended by adding the owner as a person with whom the rate of exchange for payment of wages may be agreed. So, Mr. President, Clause 154 is amended by Clause 12, which is where we are now in the Act, so page 10, by establishing the minimum leave entitlement of a seafarer, which, subject to any collective bargaining agreement, shall be a minimum of 2.5 calendar days per month of employment, and the distinction between the leave entitlement of the master and other officers and other members of the crew has been removed with the deletion of Section 154A and B of the Act. The provision, Mr. President, also specifies a place where the seafarer is entitled to take annual leave, being the place to which the seafarer is entitled to be repatriated, and establishes that where he or she is required to take annual leave at a place other than the place specified, then the cost of transporting the seafarer from that place to the place specified under the Act and the cost of subsistence during such transportation shall be borne by the ship owner. The clause amends Section 161 of the Principal Act to ensure that provisions of water for seafarers on board shall be free of charge to seafarers, and this is under Clause 13. And Clause 14 speaks to amendment of Section 171 of the Principal Act, which is repealed and replaced with a provision that addresses the ship owner's liability for medical care and burial expenses. The clause provides that the owner of a Jamaican ship is responsible for the health, protection, and medical care of all seafarers working on board the ship, and such medical care shall be comparable, as I indicated earlier, to that available to workers ashore. I spoke earlier to the liability of the owner for medical care and the cost of medical care, as well as repatriation, where such, especially where such sickness or injury is attributable to the seafarer's employment on board. So this is a clause that deals with that, clause 14, and it deals with the matter of liability for burial expenses, etc. Mr. President, this is also the section that deals with the circumstances under which an owner may not be held liable. Clause 15 amends Section 174 by inserting a requirement for the owner to have in place adequate procedures to enable seafarers on board to make a complaint in respect of their living or working conditions on board, and to have that complaint addressed. And the clause empowers the registrar of seafarers to receive complaints and to cause an investigation to be conducted, and thereafter to promptly make a report, including recommendations to remedy the complaint to the authority. And in respect of Clause 16, which inserts a new Section 174A in the Principal Act, the clause extends the powers of the inspector under the Act in cases where a ship is deemed to be unseaworthy, in circumstances where the living or working conditions on board the ship pose a significant danger to the safety, health, or security of the seafarers. Amendment of Section 194 is addressed under Clause 17, and it is this clause that provides that the seafarer, except in certain cases, shall not contribute directly or indirectly to the cost of repatriation, and nullifies any provision in the seafarer's employment agreement requiring such contribution from the seafarer or requiring the seafarer to work more than the 12 months to be entitled to repatriation. And indeed, Mr. President, perhaps I could just touch very briefly on the fact of the issue of repatriation. I know it immediately sends off bells in persons' heads, or alarms, if not bells. And trumpets, sends off loud sounds in our minds when we hear the word repatriation or the phrase repatriation of seafarers. And just to recall, when during the earlier stages of the pandemic, when our borders were closed and there were issues about the repatriation of seafarers, and we made clear that these matters had to be dealt with in an orderly and safe manner. It is because we needed to insist that, as appropriate, the owners of the ships were held to their obligations under the Maritime Labour Convention, where they were signatories under the flag of a signatory, when they were sailing under the flag of signatory countries, and that we had a right as a country to insist that they so did. But those conversations are not conversations that either A, take place in the media, or B, take place overnight. They were the course and the subject of discussions that needed to take place. Both with the Marella, which was, I believe, the ship which most brought this issue to public attention, as well as the other many ships which had to consolidate our Jamaican nationals and their other nationals, because as we all are aware, this was a global issue being managed by ships across the world with many different port countries, as we were, and sailing under the flags of different ships. But we were clear that we needed to insist that the rights of our workers needed to be respected under the flag of the ship that they were sailing, and accordingly that process was adhered to, and they did adhere to their obligations, which we must appreciate. And this is the, how international law works on the committee and ensuring appropriate enforcement and insistence by governments of enforcement and implementation of these rules. This bill is enhancing those circumstances and indeed ensuring that the Jamaican flag will carry rights under domestic legislation as well as the convention to which we have acceded. But certainly we have as a government ensured that we do our due diligence and ensure where the right applies. So you can't try to pull a fast one and tell the Jamaican government, that you're not required to, that either the seafarer must pay or the government must pay, and that you mustn't seek to have arrangements formally made. You must just act because people are upset rather in the public domain. I don't mean the seafarers themselves. These things have to be managed appropriately, safely, with concern for international obligations and international law, and I feel very confident that we so did, and in fact proud of our authorities, including the Maritime Authority and our health authorities, which ensured that all obligations were met and our citizens were therefore returned, perhaps with some less dispatch than they would have desired because of the circumstances of anxiety in which they were subsisting. And I'm sure that many of them, having landed and been able to review and reflect on what occurred, they would have a greater understanding of what occurred and the complex nature of what everyone was working through and has been working through globally on that matter. Even as they now, in fact, hope for the resurgence of the cruise industry so that they can, in fact, go back to the productive work and the productive lives that they were leading on board. So I just wanted to make that point clear, Mr. President, that the rights of our citizens have always been insisted on by this government as a matter for respect and enforcement, and we did so. Even if perhaps the way in which it was communicated or the way in which it was received publicly, because of the level of emotion and anxiety which was fraught at that time, that perhaps it may not have been as fully understood as it could have been. But, Mr. President, I continue to indicate that this bill will enhance and strengthen the enforcement of those obligations, and particular in respect of Jamaicans in the two types of ships which I mentioned earlier. But Clause 18 will insert the new 174A regarding requirement for financial security for abandoned seafarers. And it sets out the circumstances in which a seafarer shall be deemed to be abandoned, and of course provides for the matter of insurance. Clause 19 speaks to the amendment of Section 211 of the Principal Act, which now includes a provision for the Registrar of Seafarers to provide relief for a seafarer who is entitled to be repatriated and was abandoned in any place. And the ship owner must be insured for that and must be able to prove their insurance for that. And that is how the whole matter of insistence on enforcement, etc., will continue to take place and is in fact enhanced. Mr. President, Clause 20 speaks to the amendment of Section 315 of the Principal Act by outlining new items to be included in the conditions of employment and living conditions of seafarers. Clause 21 addresses Section 316 of the Principal Act, extending the power of the inspector to detain a ship, as I explained earlier, but in circumstances where the inspector perceives that conditions on board the ship constitute a serious breach of Part 7 or of any of the regulations made concerning that part, or pose a significant danger to the safety, health, or security of seafarers. And it empowers the inspector to inspect or make copies of any document or take samples of any food, water, materials, or any substance used or handled by seafarers on board. Clause 22, Mr. President, deals with 319, Section 319, Again, empowering the inspector, but this time in respect of foreign ships, to verify whether the living and working conditions correspond substantively with the particulars of the certificate. I mentioned that earlier. Section 320 speaks to the declaration of compliance and the certificate or interim, the maritime labor certificate or interim maritime labor certificate, as certificates with the appropriate, which the appropriate authority may require the master of any foreign ship to produce in order to grant clearance for departure. So the whole compliance matter is not assessed for entry into the Jamaican port. So they can enter, they will conduct their business, etc. They can be offloading goods or dealing with passengers, but in order to leave, if there is reason to require inspection or certification of compliance, the inspector can do that as a condition for the ship to leave. So this does, in fact, significantly empower our authorities to enforce the provisions of this Act and the Convention. Clause 24 deals with Section 321. Again, this is about allowing an inspector to exempt a ship from survey or inspection where a valid certificate is provided, unless, of course, there are reasonable grounds for believing that the living and working conditions don't correspond. And it also provides for the ship not to be granted clearance and its detention based on the matters which I just explained. So, Mr. President, this provides not only a summary but a clause-by-clause enumeration of the significant improvements made to our shipping industry and to the living and working conditions, the protection, rather, of the living and working conditions of our nationals on Jamaican ships, wherever they are in the world, and that is any ship registered in Jamaica, sailing under the Jamaican flag, or indeed foreign ships, Jamaicans on foreign ships in our Jamaican waters. So in this context, Mr. President, I do put this bill before this Honourable Chamber and ask for your support of its terms. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Morris.
Ms. Charles.
Mr. President, I rise to give my support to the bill, and in so doing, Mr. President, I want to recall that I think it was 1998, there was a comprehensive reform of the Shipping Act at the time, and there was a joint select committee chaired by then Minister of Transportation and Works, Dr. Peter Phillips, and I was privileged to be a member of that committee. And it did a comprehensive overhauling of the legislation governing the shipping industry, because it had date back to the 18th century, some of the provisions that were in the legislation at the time. And it was probably the largest bill that I have worked on during my sojourn in the Senate. And I am happy to see that we have not waited for those many years to elapse before we do any amendment to the legislation, because we have to keep on modernizing our legislation to make sure we keep abreast with the times. And these amendments to the legislation has come about because of our international commitments under the Maritime Labour Convention 2006, which, when you look at the amendments, Senator Gale, they fit within the decent work agenda that is subscribed to by the International Labour Organization, and which Jamaica is a signatory. And we want all and sundry to know and to understand that once you come to Jamaica and you're working with our workers, our laborers, and you are operating under Jamaican laws,
You're back up, Senator Morris. You can continue.
All right. So we want all and sundry to know that once they are operating under Jamaican laws, that they have to subscribe to the decent work agenda, because we are not going to make anybody abuse our citizens. And that is what this piece of legislation seeks to do. And I want to say that I personally appreciate, and this side appreciate, the amendments that have been put before us and in the legislation. And I want to highlight some things a few things in the legislation. Clause 7, which makes the provision for the employment contract to be made available upon request. And I sought to highlight this because I was having a conversation with a close relative of mine, Senator Brown, who works on a ship. And he was telling me of some of the conditions that they have to work under on those ships. The ship is not registered in Jamaica, but based on the provisions, Minister, this legislation covers, and it's a part of the amendment that I appreciate, it covers those ships that are registered in Jamaica, but also covers workers or seafarers from Jamaica that are working on other ships outside of Jamaica. And I think that is significant, because the relative of mine would fall in the latter category. And he was saying that he is at a level 2 in his category as a chef. And the rates that they pay him are different from the rates that they pay, say, an American citizen. And when he said it to me, I asked him, what was the extent of the variation? And he said to me that he would earn probably about, and I'm just using some examples, about 1,600 US. And the American would earn about 3,200. And they are at the same level, doing the same task. And what I see happening from this legislation is that it will give the authority the capacity to do some inspection and make queries of these variations, because, you know, as far as I'm concerned, it is significant and constitute an act of discrimination, you know. And I think these are some of the things that we have to correct, because working on a ship is a very risky engagement. Very risky and challenging engagement when individuals have to leave their families for 9 months. You know, and at sea, it's very difficult and risky. Another thing that I took note of from the bill, Mr. President, it's in Clause 8, which speaks to the employment of individuals under age 18. And I'm very happy that the legislation speaks to this, because what we have seen and heard taking place in the shipping industry constitute exploitation sometimes. And this particular section of the legislation frowns upon the employment of individuals below the age of 18, save and except if the individual is an apprentice or a student that is under guidance from a captain or a senior official on the ship. And I'm very happy for that, and I take note that further down in the legislation, it asks for the documentation of certain information, which will make it clear as to the age of the individuals who are working on the ship. So what it is doing is establishing a regime that will prevent the exploitation of minors on these ships. And we know that it happens out there, but we, as a part of our decent work agenda, we don't subscribe to that sort of employment regime. And we have to make sure that we put in place every measure to protect our minors from such exploitation. And I appreciate that amendment in the legislation. Clause 9 makes provision for the deduction of certain expenses from the seafarers, and it outlines basically a regime. But one of the concerns or the issue that came to my mind immediately, and Minister, you can give us some clarity on it, because I want to know if these ships that are registered, especially in Jamaican waters, if they have been required to deduct NHT, NIS, and other statutory deductions. And if it is that these deductions are being made, are they being sent to the relevant state agencies, the NIS, the NHT? It is very important that we ascertain this, because a part of my concern, Senator Gale, about our seafarers is that, based on the contract that I see them having with these ships, they don't employ them for over 12 months. They give them a contract that by and large go up to 9 months. And I don't know of any pension mechanism being put in place for these individuals. So we have to ensure that provisions are made, especially for those ships that are flagged here in Jamaica, to deduct NIS and NHT benefits from these seafarers, and to ensure that it is repatriated to the relevant ministries and agencies. I am also happy to note that the section makes provision for, the ships to put in place mechanisms for seafarers to send, for deductions to be made and to be sent to their families or designated individuals. Because a lot of these individuals have dependents, and they have to make sure that, they get timely disbursement of funds to their families so that they can carry on their lives. And I really appreciate that in the legislation. As I mentioned about the funds for NHT and NIS, I want to make sure that, if this is a part of the requirement, we tie that as well to the renewal of their license, because definitely we want them to comply in honoring our their statutory obligations to their the workers. We don't want to hear that a seafarer was working on a ship and then the ship lose ties with Jamaica, and then there is no benefit for that worker because there wasn't any deductions being paid over to the relevant state agency. And we have to make sure that we are clear on that to protect our workers. Clause 14 deals with medical expenses and injury to and funeral benefits to workers, and a mechanism for compensation. I want to find out, and again, it is related to the point that I raised just now about the contributions to NIS. Because if it is that a worker, a seafarer, is contributing to the NIS and should develop some form of injury, then the individual would be entitled to the disability grant at the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. Equally, if that individual should die on the ship and is a contributor to the NIS, then that individual relative would be entitled to the funeral grant under the NIS. So it is very important, Minister, that we ensure that these ships they are honoring their statutory obligations to these workers to getting their NIS and NHT benefits. Clause 19 has amendments that allows for an inspector to board a ship and demand certain documentation. And here again, the first point that I raised, I am very happy at the provision, because when I spoke about looking at the salary or the contractual obligations of the ships, definitely the inspector would be able to get information in which they could act upon and make sure that there is no sort of discriminatory practice being displayed against our workers, because the aim of these amendments is to make sure that we protect all our workers. One of the things that I want to highlight, Senator Gale, in this presentation of mine is the connectivity between this legislation and the OSHA legislation. Because once the Ministry of Labor and Social Security is involved, because I see where the minister will have a role to play, the Minister of Labor and Social Security will have a role to play in this legislation. And once the ministry has a role to play, is definitely the OSHA bill will come into play. Because if it is not the OSHA bill, it would have to be the existing Factories Act that falls under the ministry and gives the minister the authority to inspect certain facilities, certain industrial facilities, which I guess the ships would come under that categorization. So we have to make sure, Senator Gale, that the OSHA bill, I know it is at Joint Select Committee, and it was at Joint Select Committee, and a certain matter intervened, and it fell off the parliamentary order paper, so we have to put it back on the order paper as quickly as possible, because that legislation is long in coming, and we are eagerly awaiting the new OSHA bill to make sure that it gives adequate protection and coverage to our workers. And it is even more so important in light of these amendments that are being yes. So it's very important for this particular bill and the amendment, and so I'm calling for the retabling of the OSHA bill as quickly as possible, so that we can give greater protection to our workers, the safety and security of our workers, paramount in promoting a decent work agenda regime. And we on this side support strongly that decent work agenda, and so the OSHA bill is critical to that process. The final point I want to make is in I see we're in 161. In 161, the amendment that is proposed for 161, Minister, there is a penalty for the violation of any regulation covered under the bill. And the penalty that is there, Minister, is $50,000. And when I saw it, I said to myself, you know, that couldn't be realistic in a modern context. And I think that we need to take a real look at that, because, you know, $50,000 is not going to be a deterrent from individuals who will seek to violate these the provision of this legislation, and I'm proposing that we relook at that figure that is there. And so, Minister, I again express my appreciation for the amendment to the Shipping Act, an act that we did do a comprehensive overhauling in 1998. And I think that what is being proposed here serves to strengthen the legislation and to improve the condition of our workers, our seafarers who are employed to ships flagged in Jamaica, and our seafarers who are working on other ships that are registered outside of Jamaica. And we say to all and sundry that once you want our workers to work on your ship, our workers are ranked amongst the best in the world. Anywhere you go across the world, you will see and find Jamaican seafarers, and they are ranked amongst the best. And we are saying, they sell their skill to you. You take care of them and treat them well and pay them well. And as a responsible government and country, we have to make sure that we put in place the requisite mechanism for the protection of these seafarers. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Morris. Senator Gale.
President, as a trade unionist, today is a happy day. The union that I so happen to lead was built on the pillars of representing workers in the marine industry. And so this is a proud moment. And the government has taken a decision to amend the Shipping Act so as to make more complete provisions for the rights and living working conditions of seafarers in line with the Maritime Convention of 2006. And so it provides for a comprehensive framework for the rights and provisions of seafarers and to ensure decent working conditions for seafarers. And the main objective of these amendments is to ensure that Jamaica is able to meet its obligations under the convention. President, this is commendable, and I want to applaud the government. It is taking the initiative to improve the conditions of employment of workers. I also want to commend our former Senate colleague, Minister Robert Montague, for advancing this initiative. As he has always been known for one that looks out for the working class. And you know that a country is growing and making strides when it seeks to create policies to improve the legislative framework for the working class. And this government is clearly demonstrating that. President, the protection of our workers employed to multinationals anywhere in the world is a fundamental right that must be established and must be protected. And this is what this legislation is seeking to do. But, sir, for us to appreciate the scope of this legislation, we must be able to understand and appreciate the life of a seafarer, the invaluable workforce that keeps world trade moving. So 90% of the world goods, are transported by sea on any given day. And there's more than 1.6 million seafarers working on board some 70,000 vessels worldwide. These men and women are transporting cargo and goods essential to businesses and people's everyday lives that will sustain communities through this pandemic that we're going through. Ships transport goods from east to west, north to south, and everything from food and household goods and raw materials, including today hospital equipment and even the ventilators. Mr. President, for a few minutes, let us consider the life and welfare of the workers that are seafarers on board these vessels, who are always far away from home, but on the front line of this global emergency. Imagine, sir, staying on board a ship with limited space for 6 to 8 or 10 months, working as much as 10 to 12 hours a day, in some cases 7 days a week. President, imagine being away from your family and friends for months at a time, sailing across the seas, connecting global supply chains out of sight to ensure that people receive their daily essential goods. Imagine, sir, having to stay on board for an unspecified amount of time after 10 months, working sometimes, and it happened in May or July, where governments were resisting ships coming to port, and there was a call for reparation. You can only imagine those things if you are a seafarer. And today, we must commend our seafarers for the tremendous sacrifice that they make as workers. In the midst of this crisis, sir, every day, the trade unions and their global trade union federation, the International Transport Federation, is dealing with cases and situations where seafarers cannot move freely to safely sign on or off ships due to the increasing number of restrictions being placed on national governments on the movement of people in and out the countries. The situation is that governments that are dependent on the transportation of essentials goods by sea will aid the citizens' ability to get through this unprecedented crisis must be the same government, that is willing and motivating to take bold steps that will enable legislations that will protect these workers. I want to make a global call that the vital role of seafarers in this extraordinary crisis to be recognized, that every single solitary seafarer be treated as key workers, irregardless of their nationality. They must be recognized as key workers, irregardless of where they are from. Mr. President, the ITF and our maritime affiliates urge governments, politicians, ports, and flag state authorities, employers and consumers in general, to remember that our capacity to respond to this pandemic is reliant on the transportation of goods by the world's seafarers. These seafarers, they are humans too. Their health and safety are as important as anyone else. So please, let us take a moment to acknowledge their sacrifice, and let us all ensure that they are treated with the respect and dignity that they deserve, so that they can continue to provide their vital services to keep the world moving. And I believe this is what the Senate today is seeking to recognize. Why is this legislation important, Mr. President? First of all, it brings together in one place international minimum standards to ensure decent work for the estimated more than 1,000 seafarers that are Jamaicans that work here and abroad on different vessels, whose work is essential to international trade as well as to the increasingly important form of tourism and even recreational activity. Mr. President, it provides for a safe and secure workplace that complies with safety standards. It provides for fair terms of employment. It provides decent working and living conditions on board ship. And it also provides health protection, medical care, welfare measures, and other forms of social protection. Secondly, Mr. President, because it helps to provide a level playing field for the quality ship owners operating under the flag of countries that has ratified the convention, the goal is to ensure that decent working conditions go hand in hand with fair competition. So there's a balance. On the one hand, you want to ensure that there's fair competition for all owners, but on the other hand, sir, it also provides that balance for the protection of the working class. And that is one of the good things about the convention and now aligning the bill or the legislation to the convention. So this is widely known as the Seafarers' Bills of Rights. And you know, it would have been adopted by the ILO in February of 2006. President, the convention on a whole, is very comprehensive. And it sets out minimum age, employment agreements, hours of work or rest, payment of wages, paid annual leave, reparation at the end of a contract, onboard medical care, the use of licensed private recruitment and placement services, accommodation food and catering, health and safety protection and accident prevention and seafarers complaint handling. President, I illustrate that because it has to demonstrate how far-reaching and wide-ranging this legislation is. And that is commendable. President, the legislation covers all persons who are employed or engaged in work in any capacity on board a ship to which the convention applies. You know, the minister in our presentation suggested that it had expanded its reach in terms of the protection of employees. Not only just crew members, but any employee that works on a ship. President, as a trade unionist, we have always advocated that articles in labor conventions, that legislations must be aligned to articles in labor conventions. We've always advocated for that. That is one of the promotions of trade unions. And today, this government has responded to that call, and it's commendable. President, there are some key areas in the legislation that, jumps out at me. Spoke about clause 9. Subclause 2, the owner or other person responsible for employing the crew of a Jamaican ship shall give to each seafarer employed on that ship monthly account of the wages due to the seafarer, all deductions made therefrom, and at all costs applicable to the seafarer pursuant to subsection 5. And an account under this section or section 134 shall in any case where section 140 applies also state the exchange applied pursuant to that section. The key part to this, and Senator Morris made reference to it. The owner of the ship shall establish a system for enabling seafarers engaged to work on board the ship to, at the time of the engagement or at any time during the engagement, up to allot a portion of their wages for remittance to their families, dependents, or legal beneficiaries by bank transfers. President, this takes into account, that you go and work a foreign, because from you leave the shores, you are away. But life goes on for your household. Bills must be paid. Family must eat. And it is taken into consideration a medium to provide remittance so that you can send back the little money that you earn or a portion thereof to your family. This is a key aspect of this legislation to ensure that whilst you're away for those 9 or 10 months and you're not at any port, you're not at any base, you're not at any other land, but efforts are made to ensure that remittance takes place. President, clause 14. The responsibility for the health protection and medical care for all seafarers working on board the ship shall ensure that the health protection and medical care is given promptly and of a standard that is as closely comparable as possible to that which is generally available for the workers ashore. So this creates some confidence in the worker's mind that whatever would have been applicable to a worker ashore is at the same level of the protection to which they are on the ship. And this is key. Well, I'm coming to that, you know. I'm coming to that. And so that they are liable for all the cost of medical care in respect to sickness or injury. But most importantly, sir, is page 12, subsection 2, where any sickness or injury referred in subsection 1 results in the seafarer's incapacity to work, the owner now shall pay the full wages of the seafarers as long as the seafarer remains on board the ship or until the seafarer is repatriated in accordance with section 194. So it assumes, sir, that notwithstanding the fact that you may be incapable of working due to illness, you are still ensured your full payment of wages. Again, colleagues, this is commendable. And it also gives the inference of dealing with applicable collective labor agreements. So that opens the door for negotiations, that opens the door to increase on that amount or that provision. 15, sir, on page 14. You know, sometimes we take some things for granted. The owner of the ship shall ensure that there's a place on board the ship, the adequate procedures to enable any seafarer on board the ship to make a complaint in respect of the seafarer's living or working conditions on board, and to have that complaint addressed and determined. Again, Senator Brown, we treat that as the grievance procedures. But this provides, you know, you are aware. You are not satisfied, you are concerned about either your living conditions or your working conditions. This piece of legislation now makes the provision for you to raise those concerns and have them being addressed. Hopefully. But at least the medium is there. Chair, President, Clause 18. Clause 18 deals with seafarers' reparation. Further to this section, a seafarer shall be deemed abandonment. Our union, sir, being a member of the International Transport Federation, on occasions would have had to respond to calls from a seafarer who may be abandoned by the owners at our port. And just imagine for a moment, you as a seafarer going into a foreign jurisdiction and being abandoned, and there is no recourse. That poses a great challenge for any employee. And I'm honored because the bill seeks to recognize and treat with that protection. President, I want to examine the future of a seafarer. Because every hour of every day, thousands of commercial ships are traveling the world, transporting goods and people across the ocean. And this happens 24 hours a day, 365 days. a year. And so, seafaring is one of the world's oldest professions. In the past, a seafarer career usually started at sea on board a ship. I'm not going there with you today. I know you're talking to Senator Brown, but I'm not going there with you today. Whereas youths are start at a very early age, were introduced to the work culture of shipping. The skills needed change slowly, and the profession was learned while working, where the expertise was passed from the experienced seafarer to the apprentice. Later, the development of different ships and the technological advances demanded a higher level of education. Nautical education started to be offered in schools on shore, in addition to a variety of subjects relevant to the safe operations of ships. President, over the past half-century, employment patterns have changed radically. And the two concrete challenges that seafarers' profession face today, and even more in the future, is one, there is a shortage in the supply of skilled seafarers worldwide. And secondly, predicting the future skills needed due to digitalization is a challenge. The world is changing as we speak today, and it will continue to change because of the advent and investment in digitalization. So there is a need, sir, of continued efforts to invest in the skills required for the changing needs of the ships in the future. And a lot of pressure is put on the current and future maritime education and training. It should be high quality and visible to attract good students, produce graduates with appropriate needed competencies, and at the same time be able to respond to the new changing training needs quickly. So our own Caribbean Maritime University has a fundamental role to play in the development and training needs for this profession. President, the other big challenge is to predict, sir, the future skills needed, especially between now and the time of the increased automation. And we can't be sure that the skill sets and training needs required both in the immediate, medium-term and long-term future of the shipping industry will be different than today, because it continues to change. And it continues to change because of competition and new modalities that would have been developed. An additional challenge is that there are other sectors that is competing for these skill sets. However, this is an opportunity, and it shows that the future skills needed in the maritime sector can be useful anywhere, given the flexibility to individual career paths. Mr. President, with increasing digitalization and automation of the shipping industry in Nassau, future seafarers must master new technology as well as good seamanship. And the ships of the future are based on advanced technology at all levels and will require different and more technically advanced knowledge, expertise than today's shipping, be on board or on shore. The developments of increasing digitalization in us may offer different and improved job opportunities for the modern seafarers, as instead of staying at sea for months, they can also have jobs on shore. And President, what this does is that creating new types of jobs on shore might also give more women, more opportunities to pursue careers in the shipping industry. So, the seafarer's profession, sir, it may be undergoing a considerable change from a technological perspective, but it will continue to play a vital role in the water transportation of international trades, also in the future and on offshore. Senator Morris made reference to the occupational safety and health legislation. A lot of work was done. The committee would have been at the stage of, Senator Brown, we had reached the schedule, and we're pretty close to the end to determining the deal with the definition clause, to align the definitions with areas used in the legislation. But it needs to come back to a joint select committee, which, Senator Morris, I believe you have been appointed to be a part of that one whenever it meets. But it needs to come back, because that is a very important piece of legislation that requires passage. In closing, sir, I welcome this important piece of legislation today. There are some areas in this legislation, notwithstanding the fact that it is offshore, but there are some critical components that have been identified in these legislations that would be valuable to some workers onshore. And so, this is a legislation that in my mind is sailing on the high seas for the working class. But it is a prime example for other industries to follow. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Gill.
Mr. President.
Senator Allen.
Actually, I'm good. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be brief, and really, when I say brief, I really mean brief.
Just because of you, Senator Brahan. Come on.
But
Senator Allen, I'm going to protect. I want to protect Senator Allen. You know.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. You know, it's a regional thing. There are really just 2 points that I want to make about this bill, but before I do, obviously, I too am in support of this piece of legislation. Obviously, being opposition spokesperson on tourism, I'm particularly interested in the hospitality side, the cruise shipping side, that this impacts. So wherever workers are being protected, Jamaican workers are being protected, whether in Jamaican waters or elsewhere, certainly we are going to be supportive and look forward to being able to be of great service to our countrymen. And recently, as the minister pointed out, earlier this year, when the business of the repatriation of Jamaican seafarers was topical, as a Montegonian, and I'm sure Mr. President can appreciate this, because like myself, ship workers are people we know. We know them every day, we've seen them, we're related to them. And so when we heard of their plight on the seas and understood what it took for them to be repatriated home, these are people that we knew, because I knew some people in that bunch. So most Jamaicans finally became very familiar with, as we call them, ship workers. They're in Granville, they're in Flanker, they're everywhere. So of course we welcome this bill and welcome the amendments that are being made to provide for better working environment for them. It wouldn't hurt at all if these types of facilities that are being put in place for workers on the high seas are contemplated for workers on land, because they're quite. So we look forward to that discussion, and I'm in agreement with you, Senator Gale, when you mentioned the critical nature of the work provided by seafarers, not only in cargo, but also in cruise shipping. And of course, providing for them is important, and I saw where you were leading towards the possibility of the similar treatment on land. So I welcome that, of course. There are 2 points, like I said before, that I just wanted to make. Recently, the Minister of Tourism made mention of when Jamaica signs off on this legislation, that he has been in discussions where there are about 10,000 workers possibly being employed by a certain cruise line. Now, I know when we were repatriating persons recently, at one point there was a number of about 1,044 with one particular line and another few hundred with another particular line. So it sounds pretty ambitious to me, 10,000. It would be good, because obviously as a spokesperson for tourism, for so many persons to be employed, that would be tremendous and fantastic. But I certainly look forward to getting a little bit more detail. A dreamline? Well, you know, there are many things that were mentioned, you know, because in when was it? We were supposed to have some resurgence and the coming back of the industry in June, and then it moved to September. So I don't know if these numbers fall in that category, but we await the details from the minister. But because his mouth sweet, his mouth is sweet. But the reality, though, cruise shipping, as we understand, and in speaking to those who are involved in the business, the most, I guess, likely restart date for cruise shipping is about March, they say. And we look forward to that. So I'm sure many of the seafarers who are now back home since May or June are looking forward to hearing whether they will be employed. And if it's 10,000, great. If it's not, we would understand, but 10,000 is a big number. So we look forward to hearing more from the minister. Senator Gale was making a point that I thought he was about to say something that I wanted to suggest for consideration by the Minister of Health. You're speaking of the importance and the critical nature of the work of seafarers and how they are, especially at this time. And I thought you were heading down the path where you would suggest that they be considered so essential that as we are looking at the distribution of vaccines for COVID, and that we contemplate the possibility of seafarers being considered in the ranking. I'm not suggesting that they are frontline in terms of first responders or so, but they play such a critical role in the economy, the global economy, in Jamaica's economy, in the tourism contribution, and also in the business of transporting of goods and services, that maybe the fact that in November, when there was a restart, Mr. President, of cruise shipping by a particular line that was plying in the Caribbean, and within a short time after the start of the cruise, there was an outbreak of COVID on the ship, and it had to be halted. If we are suggesting that our workers will go back to work, we want to see how best we can protect them, because they are almost becoming frontline workers in this global restart of the world's economy. So we would want to see how best we can contemplate that, because we're in a new environment where we have to think of things differently, and care and consideration for workers has now broadened in this new world that we're in. So we look forward to that. So in closing, remember I said I would be brief. So you can take me at my word when I say I'm going to be brief, right? I'm speaking to whomever it is that it applies to, even my colleague. Mr. President.
Mr. President, Senator Allen needs to be protected.
Mr. President is about to protect me. He's about to protect me. So I make this call to the government, and in particular the Minister of Health, to contemplate not only in the distribution of vaccines when they do become available in Jamaica, to tourism workers, to frontline workers who have now been redefined due to the pandemic and this world that we're in. Thank you, if you please.
Thank you very much, Senator Allen.
Senator, can you see how presentations are done? Short and to the point.
Senator Longmore.
Thank you. Oops. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Senator Webby? Senator Webby? It's the Christmas spirit. Mr. President, I rise to make a brief contribution. My brief is somewhere in between both ladies on the other side of the aisle. I too must add my pleasure and sense of accomplishment for being able to contribute to this very significant bill for a very significant group of our workers. Being a signatory to the Maritime Labour Convention 2006, as our leader indicated, and now enacting this law makes great strides for expanding the opportunities that our Jamaicans have in terms of gainful employment, and particularly our young persons. Senator Gale mentioned the opportunity probably for women. And I reflected on pulling up at a traffic light and seeing this massive bus navigating the traffic, one of the JOTC buses. And when I looked, it was a woman who had her nails well manicured and very proudly behind the steering wheel. And I reflected on it, as Senator Gale mentioned, in terms of probably what is perceived as a traditional male place of employment, for opportunities for women to really pay attention to what is happening with this piece of legislation and possible opportunities that could come from that. So I really do appreciate that comment that you made, Senator Gale. I wanted to just focus, my main focus is on Clause 14 of the Act. And to put it in context, we recognize, and I'm sure I didn't see a definition laid out here in terms of the definition for serious injury and or medical consequences. But as we are becoming more and more aware of the psychological and the mental impact of illnesses, I'm hoping and I'm pretty sure that such would have been covered by this piece of legislation, but I'm just making sure I am on record to recognize that. Now, the mental health impact on seafarers. A study was done by Robert Iverson in 2012. And let me just read the conclusion from that study. the data on suicides, and I quote, the data on suicides proves that the mental health of seafarers in many cases continues to be very poor and often fatal. With deaths aboard merchant ships resulting from depression leading to suicide being widely reported, the damage to seafarers, their families, and ship owners cannot be ignored. It strongly demonstrates the need for everybody connected with the international maritime shipping industry to do something about it. The mental health of seafarers and the economic health of the shipping industry will be improved as a result. And so this just underscores the importance of this recognition of the coverage under section, under clause 14. But I have a greater, something that I needed to clarify, and I requested of the technocrats their guidance here, where 14.1a basically lays out that, subject to the provisions of this section, the owner of the Jamaican ship shall be responsible for the health, protection, and medical care of all seafarers working on board the ship, and shall ensure health protection and medical care is given promptly and of a standard that is closely comparable to the comparable as possible to that which the workers would have assured. Now, at 3A, liability under this section to meet the costs of medical care for sickness or injury and to pay wages in whole or in part with respect of a seafarer who is no longer on board shall cease on whichever is earlier of, 1, when the seafarer has recovered from the injury or the sickness, or the injury has been declared by a medical practitioner to be of a permanent character, or the time in which the seafarer can claim medical benefits. Now, I find that to be contradictory later in section 14.3b, where it states, excuse me one second, in the case, in 3b now, it states, in the case of medical costs, is limited to the medical costs incurred over a period of 16 weeks, reckoned from the date of commencement of the sickness or injury. So what we have here is a contradiction, where it first indicates that it could be based on the declaration of a practitioner that the person is well, or they have recovered. But later on, you're seeing where there may be a limitation of 16 weeks imposed. Now, what occurs when this 16 weeks has passed and they have not been declared to have been fully recovered? So I then now, with consultation, recognize that this was adopted from regulations 4.2 of the actual convention, which indicates towards ship owners' liability. And this now indicates that the national laws may indicate a liability limitation of 16 weeks. Now, in our legislation, our proposed legislation here, we actually have a kind of contradiction happening, unless I'm not understanding it myself properly. But I think that we need to review whether or not we are going to have this 16-week limitation, or we're going to go with the first indication of the person being declared as outlined here, as outlined where it could be that the person is declared well by a medical practitioner or has recovered from the illness. So that is my main concern with respect to the bill, because this significantly impacts, whereas many injuries that persons who are in these work environments can be quite long-lasting. There can be need for rehabilitative care. There can be need for care towards a psychological impact. Some persons can be incapacitated for life. And my concern around this is the 16-week limitation. Clearly, we are also recognizing that persons who work in these capacities tend to be compensated well. I could also suggest that, as we would a public education program, that we significantly emphasize the potential workers, the need to ensure with clarity what obtains in terms of possible injury, and putting in, using some of the well-compensated avenues that they tend to be privy to, using those avenues to probably secure, apart from the NIS, as Senator Morris had indicated, but also securing their own safety net. And I think with the predisposition to especially the mental health impact, in some industries, when we recognize that there is significant mental health weight or a psychological impact on the industry, you actually have to screen persons. You actually have to screen persons, even to become a psychiatrist or a psychologist. It's not everyone who can handle the rigors of it. And you go through a screen process before you're actually admitted into the profession. And so maybe we need to consider, because of the predisposition to suicides, depression, etc., we probably would want to educate the public and the potential workers as to this propensity towards such, so that they can make a wise decision and also possibly make the financial safety nets, put those in place so that they will be adequately dealt with in the event that something untoward happens. So that, therein lies my contribution, and again, I support the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Longmore. Senator Brown.
Mr. President, the previous speakers have spoken about brevity. And I don't know that I share their, I don't know if I shared their view as to what is brevity. But be that as it may.
Well, Senator Brown, you can resign yourself to making the sort of presentation you want to make.
I will do that after you put on the agenda a certain item which comes before all other items, starting with O. Mr. President, today being the 11th of December, the day after, as the minister said, International Human Rights. Workers' rights are human rights. So it is good and well that we are discussing workers' rights the day after. But for some of us, this day have another significance. It is the day after the 96th birthday of the most Honourable Michael Manley, a leader who contributed in the trade unions field and as Prime Minister towards the shipping industry. But it's also, Mr. President, the day before another important birthday to some of us, being the day before the birthday of the most Honourable Portia Lucretia Simpson Miller, which comes tomorrow. And being a lady, I won't tell what age she will be. But they know their history, and they know the people who have served the people of this country well. So we praise those two leaders, who in many ways have contributed to the shipping industry as well, but have contributed to the nation and to the poor people and the middle class people of Jamaica. And I praise them in this special week. Mr. President, this bill seeks to incorporate, as the objects and of the memorandum of objects and reasons says, it is to bring us in line with the Maritime Labour Convention. It is expected that these amendments will ensure that Jamaica is able to meet its obligations under the convention. And we are incorporating these conventions, as Senator Morris said, in the 1999 effective early 99, Shipping Act of Jamaica, which has Senator Morris, who is the opposition spokesperson, named by Mr. Mark Golding as a representative for Labour and Special Abilities, as he has named my good friend Senator Johnson, Senator Allen, Senator Sophia Bean, Senator Morris, Senator Crawford, and Senator Martley Scott to his shadow cabinet. We all served there. I'm looking to see. I'm looking to see. I'm looking to see.
What did you have to do this morning?
I'm looking to see. But suffice it to say that in naming these shadow ministers from the cabinet, he is expressing his confidence in those 7 of us who at this point remain in the Senate and expect to remain for some time to come. We look forward.
May I remind Senator Cavan-Gale the note made by Minister Morgan, responsible for information, about that proverbial roach and chicken? So you keep yourself quiet.
I would hate to know that Senator Morgan has taken on the characteristics of a roach. I thought he was better than that.
I would hate to know that some have taken on the characteristics of a chicken.
Well, in this case, we are declaring that there's no chicken on this side. All 7 of us serves in the shadow cabinet at the pleasure of the leader, Senator Mr. Mark Golding, and we believe that there will be an 8th senator soon.
Senator Brown,
yes,
an act to amend the Shipping Act,
in which the spokesperson on tourism and the spokesperson on Labour have already spoken, and the spokesperson on the public service is now speaking. I don't have the justice one, and gender affairs will speak. But Mr. President, the 1999 Act is, as Senator Morris said, a large piece of legislation, and it aimed to address issues affecting the shipping industry. In respect to this particular bill before us, which is to make the connection with the Maritime Labour Convention, I, Mr. President, is in a privileged position because when the Maritime Labour Convention was being discussed at the International Labour Conference in Geneva, for the 3 years of discussion, I happened to have been a member of the official Jamaican delegation to the International Labour Conference. So I was in the halls, I was in the caucus rooms, discussing the issues that went into the convention. Mr. President, the trade union movement of the world, as Senator Gale pointed out, was aggressive in ensuring that progressive measures were put in the conventions. They lobbied the governments, and we in the trade union movement, Senator Gale, in the region, lobbied our ministers to support the convention. So this is a convention which must be credited to the workers of the world through their trade union movement, through their advocacy skill, through their lobbying. And so this is not some gift being given to the Jamaican workers by the government of the day. These are measures fought for and won on the floors of the ILO. And Senator Webby, the employers were represented. 120, nearly 200 employers organizations around the world. So we got compromise. We got the impact of social dialogue working, and a tripartite agreement came out of it. Just as I want to place on record my support for the Shipping Association of Jamaica and the stalwarts who formed it and ensure that they work in harmony with the trade unions of Jamaica. So that these measures are not measures that are going to start anew because this bill is passed. This bill is catching up with the 206 convention. And it's well that we catch up, because sometimes we are ahead. But in respect to the points we're inserting in this bill, we are catching up. The workers, the ship workers, are deserving, Mr. President, of the benefits contained herein. For example, Senator Bryan not here now, but I am sure he must be supportive of the fact that under this legislation, the 1 in 20 leave arrangement for workers in many industries in the country is going to be 2.5 per month, which essentially, Senator Gill, is 6 weeks of leave, because that's 12 times 2.5, that's 30 days. Many workers you represent and I represent would be happy to be enjoying these 30 days. And so, if you and I and others agitate in the land tourism for what the ship tourism workers are going to enjoy, nobody should begrudge us or begrudge the tourist workers for wanting 30 days vacation leave per year. But we're introducing this year, and that's good. Part of the fight in Geneva, and we're adopting it in our legislation, is that sick benefits, that people should get free medical attention. Workers should get free medical attention. And they should get funeral benefits. Oh, I wish the government to do that for the civil servants. Oh, I wish the policeman who died on Camp Road yesterday family will not have to struggle for these benefits. We are prepared to do it for the ship workers. We should be open to doing it for the Jamaican workers, including government employees. I know you're going to tell me it's there all along, but go pick up any policeman family who died in the line of duty and see how long it is for them to get this. So, point I'm making is this legislation is enshrining that which already exists. For example, Minister, you'd recall during the issue of the reparation of the cruise workers, we pointed out about this Maritime Labour Convention, which required, I know you did too, all of us, we. Let the we be across side. Today, Minister, look here. Look here, Minister. The arms are wide open today. We're embracing the points together. Right? We're embracing the points together. We spoke about the Maritime Labour Convention because that convention required the cruise ship owners to bring our people home at no cost to them or to the government. So we're at one. And as I said, I was in Geneva. I was there when the fight was taking place, when the battle was won. And today we are extending the benefit of those in law, because de facto they have been in place. We're just making it de jure now. So ship workers are deserving, Mr. President, and we appreciate the fact that we're catching up. Some people would say, Senator Gill, that this is about that tourism now is about land tourism and cruise tourism, the cruise ships. And by the way, I don't think the Shipping Act mentioned, Senator Webby, the cruise ships as part of the definition, and maybe something to be considered. It speaks of passenger ships, but passenger ships may sound like the Windrush, because there's a time when ship was a major part of transportation of passengers. So, but the cruise ship are up on us, and we therefore should probably include in our definition the cruise ship, because much of the benefits about those working in store and working in other areas on the ship relate to the cruise ship rather than cargo or, in the past, passenger ship. So it would be good if we insert in the Principal Act the definition of cruise ship. I urge that to the authorities for them to consider and to put in. Mr. President, having said that, may I also urge the government, since we are now into workers' rights and convention, that there's a convention, Senator Webby, C-192, Convention on the Termination of Employment. It would be good for the government to bring that too within the Employment Termination and Redundancy Payment Act, so that the ILO Convention, the point you are making, Senator Gill, we can be at one on it, that these conventions touching upon labor should be incorporated in our domestic law. Thankfully, Mr. President, the courts have adopted the ideas put out by Carl Rattray, President of the Court of Appeal then, in the Village Resort case, which has identified the rights of workers in Jamaica relative to dismissal. So maybe, just out of formality, we should adopt the Convention on Termination of Employment. So we root the protection, local protection in international law. Mr. President, we're not going to go into a lot of the clause by clause. There's some we have some concern about, and I'll come to that. But I want to make a point that I believe I can get the support of my friend from Greece, Senator Webby. Senator Webby, shipping industry has been key to the development. Shipping industry has been key to the development of our country, Jamaica, land we love. Mr. President, from the slave ships that brought our ancestors here, our foreparents here, to the Supermax ships of the logistic era, from bulk goods and numerous pier litter in the waterfront, Senator Webby, to container ships. There's been big development, big changes in our country. And sometimes the younger ones say nothing happened. But you and I can testify that in the shipping industry, there have been great development. From the struggle, Senator Gill, of Aggie Bernard, Bustamante, and the striking workers on the waterfront, through William Grant, through Upton Cavan, through Milton Scully Scott, the benefits for workers have been achieved in the shipping industry. They have fought tirelessly, so much so, Mr. President, that one of the trade unionists who was part of that struggle in the 30s and onward had the port named after him, Bustamante. Port Bustamante was named after one of the trade unionists. Some may say because he became Prime Minister too. But it shows, Senator Gill, when we fight even against the odds for the rights of the workers, onward lays respect for us. So I raise this, Mr. President, because it's part of what I'm saying, or we should see the shipping industry. Senator Campbell, from those workers who went to Panama to build the canal for the shipping industry, through to the Windrush, Mr. President, and all those who migrated by ship, it's part of our history. And we can't make just the Windrush issue in England be left there. But we must acknowledge and recognize the role of our workers locally and globally in the shipping industry. And for that reason, Senator Webby, I seek your support in saying, let's talk to the University of the West Indies, to Vereen Shepherd, Professor Shepherd and others, to write the history of shipping in Jamaica, which take us from 1494 Columbus ships to the Supermax of today, to the changes on the wharf, because it has not only impacted the commercial development of our country, the wharf, Senator Gill, as you mentioned, affected the political development of our country, and then the economic development arising from all of this require the history of shipping to be written. I've seen the history of the SAJ, Charles Johnson, those, and we thank them for the vision of working together with the unions in a joint industrial council to improve things. And President, I crave your indulgence just to look at the shipping industry for which we are amending the existing law today to address an issue topical in the country, critical to the prosperity we seek. It is the issue, Senator Webby, of productivity. Too often, Mr. President, people get up and bemoan the fall in labor productivity in the country. But I'm prepared to take a bet, without the numbers available to me today, Senator Webby, I'm prepared to take a bet that labor productivity in the shipping industry is super high. Super high. And there's a reason for that. They are not relying on those who were just moving bulk cargo. They are putting in the necessary capital. They're putting a set of crane, then that set of crane can reach the heights they need, and they put in a new set of crane, better cranes. In other words, Senator Webby, of course, what is clear to me, if you want to get labor productivity up, look at the shipping industry. They have done so by investing in total factor productivity, not just focusing on the man with the machete or the man lifting up a bag of flour. They have put in the equipment necessary. They have put in the training necessary. And they are paying people better. So much of the conditions we are approving today in the shipping industry, they are ahead of it. In fact, Senator Webby, there are less workers now, significantly less workers than the time of Bustamante. They are carrying more goods now through the port than the time of Aggie Bernard. They are doing more at the ports now, transshipment and all of that, than the time of Upton Cable. And you know what, Senator Gill? Let us remind our friends that all of these productivity gains came with the cooperation of the trade unions. whether it is the Nettleford Commission, whether it's the Merit Commission, whether it's through the Giant Industrial Council, the unions have sided with productivity. And I urge those who are critical of the labor productivity, and yes, it has fallen, to look to see why it is so high at the port. Adapt that approach, and Jamaica will be on its road to real prosperity. Those shipping owners have had to respond to international competition, or else Jamaica would not be on the thing. That is why when Anthony Hilton spoke about logistics center and some mocked him, they didn't understand the value of the shipping industry to us in the country. And shipping has just been part of the logistics setup. When we talked about the logistics center, we were looking broader on how to grow the country, how to make the country prosperous, how to improve the life of our people. And so, President, I speak of the need for history writing on the shipping industry in Jamaica. Because we have ships dealing with bauxite. Mr. President, you would recall Bowden Wharf, the Arakabesa, Sav, and throughout the country the role of shipping. And so it's important that we acknowledge it, we learn from history, and we see the developments that have taken place in our country. And Minister, there's something again we can embrace on, because if we know history, we can make the future better. And so I make this call for the University History Department to do a study from Columbus through to the slave ships, through to the commerce in our key ports, through to the supermax of today, and recognizing the value of the logistic center. And bear in mind, President, that we can do this because in the world, it's a very competitive place. But some can choose Senator Williams to compete for the bottom, pay our workers the less, treat them badly, or we can compete with the very best in the world. And Jamaica ports are doing that now, thanks to visionary leadership on the ports. Mr. President, key to our successful shipping industry is our building of capacity. And here the CMU, coming from the Caribbean Maritime Institute, through to the Caribbean Maritime University, has a key role to play. My interest is not what's happening at Halfway Tree today. I have no interest right now in that. My interest, Senator Gill, is that if the staff at the Caribbean Maritime Institute, University, are not treated properly, their ability to build the capacity for us to take advantage of the opportunities in the world are going to be diminished. I take that word. Good. So, President, we must ensure that the staff at the CMU are respected. Senator Samuda, it can't be right to have a registrar in place and then you advertise for a register position without the knowledge of the registrar, current registrar, or settling with the current registrar the way forward. Can't be right. Because if that approach takes place at the CMU, what will they teach the seafarers going on? If the communication with the staff there is poor, then how will they communicate to the seafarers the right thing to do? If people on fixed-term contracts enter again are not having the contracts formally renewed, and you're paying one set different from the other, I'm urging through this presentation that the Ministry of Education take a look at what is happening at the CMU currently. Fix it, because this is the institution on which we are relying on to train the seafarers. Oh, sorry. Let's
Mr. President, the time being 1:20, might the Senate be permitted to sit beyond 1:30 to complete the business of the day?
If you're, I'm going to be finishing short, but if you, yeah. So I spoke then about the need to fix the CMU and for Education Ministry to intervene and address the staff problems that are there right now. Mr. President, I just have a philosophical problem with the amended clause 114C, which is on page 5, which is under clause 3 of this bill, but on page 5. The minister may by order publish in the Gazette exempt any ships of a category specifying the order from the requirement of this part. I'm of the view that when the Parliament, the lower house, the upper house, pass legislation, it can't be for the minister to be given the power to just change what the collective 84 voted on. I have a philosophical problem with that. And I would urge that any amendment by the minister should come by resolution, affirmative resolution. And I call for that. Mr. President, this will protect the minister. I'll start with the minister. It will protect the minister, because it is well known that in our country there are many who are willing to offer bribes to ministers. Let us remove the opportunity for them to offer bribes to ministers. So let it be a collective decision. Let the bribing be so expensive that it makes no sense. They have to bribe all 84 of us. It makes no sense to do. So I have a problem philosophically with the minister giving the exemption. What I want to know in closing, President, is how does the maternity leave law relate and the employment termination issue and redundancy apply to these ship workers beyond our shore, where those jurisdictions do not apply to them? Are they part of a collective bargaining agreement globally? Are they part of the convention? How do we ensure that our laws are protected? So in closing, President, let me express to the family of the policeman who died yesterday our heartfelt condolences. I do so on behalf of all of us in the Senate. A tragic incident, hit off a bike, died. I also, Mr. President, is saddened by the fact that we woke up, all of us, and heard that in a district I've never heard the name of before, Planters in Old Harbour. 4 of our citizens died, was murdered last night. It may be safer to be out at sea on a ship than to be living in a quiet Jamaican neighborhood. The crime thing needs to be fixed, but that's for another place and another time. The opposition, as spokesperson on Labour and Special Abilities have said, as Senator Allen, our spokesperson on Tourism, have said, we have no problem with incorporating parts of the Maritime Labour Convention into this. Minister, we embrace this one. We apologize for having to go as long as 125, but we'll make it up next time with the shorter bills. May it please you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Brown. Leader?
Thank you, Mr. President. And it is with true gratitude that I acknowledge the remarks of colleagues on both sides this morning. Clearly, the important benefits to be garnered for our workers through the provisions of this bill have been broadly recognized and are appreciated, and are in some ways even the culmination of work across administrations and way beyond our shores. And we therefore hail all of the efforts that have been made that focus the minds and focus legislative work on the dignity of work and ensuring that we do our best to permit a dignified work by Jamaicans at the highest standards across the world, wherever they may sail. On the proposals that have been made, Mr. President, if I can just briefly address the query by Senator Morris regarding the remittance of NIS and NHT, etc. The fact is that this bill does nothing to change the employment laws of Jamaica. The employment laws of Jamaica apply to Jamaican employees, and to flag ships which bear the flag of Jamaica are governed by Jamaican law in the same way that foreign ships are governed by the laws of the country under whose flag they sail. So that even if a Jamaican worker is on a foreign ship, he is working under their laws. If a Jamaican is on a Jamaican flagship, then, of course, he is governed by the Jamaican law of Employment Termination and Redundancy Act, and the other laws which speak to the remittance to government agencies. So anything that is required under Jamaican employment law applies to them. There's nothing in this act that changes that. So in terms of your specific request as to whether remittances are being made of these agencies, we would have to make inquiries. But I do understand that perhaps seafarers who earn worldwide are also not necessarily given to the transparency that allows for income tax and such matters as well. So these inquiries, which you are suggesting, may be a bit of an ant nest for some, if I put it that way. But we can make the inquiries as to what is being done. The Jamaican employment laws apply to Jamaican citizens who work on Jamaican ships. Regarding the matter of the penalties that are referred to in section 161(2), so there is to be a review of all of the penalties. It is recognized that the penalty there is a bit low, but it will form part of a general review because it's not the only penalty that is in the Act and that is low. So there will be a review and those amendments will be brought because that has to be attacked holistically. Regarding the matter of regulations, just want to assure that the regulations are in fact finalized and therefore they're already promulgated, they're already drafted, so they will be formalized shortly. And on the matter raised regarding Clause 14, and that is the issue of the recovery period as defined under 171(3), it is being proposed, an amendment is being proposed to delete the 16-week limit to allow the broader recovery period as declared by a medical practitioner, or at least until he or she falls under some private insurance scheme, that will then be operative once the subclause, sorry, let me just find it back, it's under clause 14, and it is in fact the amendment of 17.3b. That it is 17.3b, which will be deleted, and that will allow the earlier provisions to take effect with greater clarity. That amendment would also be consistent with the convention, and that's something that we have to be very clear on, because the fact is that all of the benefits that we speak about really only come with the standardization of practices and laws in accordance with the convention. The more you try to stylize and particularize within a country, is the more you create hurdles for companies or recruitment agencies that might otherwise have considered your jurisdiction based on its adherence to the convention. So we have done the relevant check, and we have contacted the minister, and he has confirmed that he would approve that amendment to be made here in the Senate. So, Mr. President, with that, I would ask for second reading of the bill, and again thank colleagues on both sides for their proposals and consideration. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Minister. The question is that the bill be read for a second time. Those in favour?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Shipping Act, read a second time.
The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. Thank you, Mr. Marshall. I take it with broad agreement I can put clauses 1, 2, and 3. Those in favour?
Go to 1, 2, because that 3.
I'm sorry.
No problem. I put clause 1.
And 2, yeah.
No, not 2. I just.
It's okay. So let me just proceed. I put clause 1. Those in favour? Against? I put clause 2.
I just wanted to ask. I have noted, Minister, I did not speak, and while actually looking at one of the proposed amendments, I noted that although some amendments had been made, resident magistrate still appeared. So instead of parish court, and I realized that it had been consistent through the legislation, because the legislation, although it amends sections, does not speak to that. In fact, throughout this bill, the word parish court is used once. I was wondering if in 2, where you have the principal act is amended by deleting and substituting wherever it appears, if a quick way to do it would be to say to delete resident magistrate, and wherever it appears to substitute parish court.
Thank you for that suggestion. I'm just waiting for some guidance from CPC, because it may well be that it has been treated with otherwise. So it's being checked. Thank you. But the intent of the proposal is certainly the logic.
I should have discussed it earlier, but it really did not.
No, that's fine. So we just check on that at this time, and I see there's a query behind you.
Yeah.
So I return to clause 2.
No, on clause 2, yeah.
I'll return to clause 2.
Yeah.
I return, okay.
Through your chair. No, yeah, before you return to it, since I did raise the issue of, in the principal act, the absence of cruise ship being defined. And are they satisfied that passenger ship is sufficient to cover?
Yes, that is my understanding. Yes. Sorry, I should have dealt with it in my closing. Yes, it is acceptable.
Okay, thank you. So I return to clause 2. Clause 3. Those in favour?
That clause 3, Chairman. I wonder if the government would be open to agreeing to the exemption being subject to affirmative resolution.
I would not like to consider that at this point, because the truth is that these are going to be practical matters being assessed in the likelihood of a particular ship in particular circumstances, or I don't know if making everything subject to affirmative resolution is always the best. I think some things need to just be dealt with administratively. And I think I would, unless there is...
The problem, Minister, if I may, is you get into a public spot, not you, the government, whoever is the government, over an issue of a license for mining in Discovery Bay. That's you. You get into an issue with Integrity Commission over importation of chicken backs, all arising from the minister's discretion. And if the minister's discretion is not subject to the transparency and the accountability of Parliament. And that's why I'm raising it, because otherwise we're going to always have the issue where Senator Arbinell will have to go and read it and say, well, the importance of politicians should be respected and not leave it to some other arbiters to decide. And it's dangerous for ministers. It set them up. And it set up the class of politicians to be seen as corrupt when others are the ones leading the corruption.
Now, I get the impression that it's an issue of policy. I put clause 3. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 4, 5, and 6. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clauses 7, 8, and 9. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put 10, 11, 12, and 13. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. Minister, I think there is an amendment to 14.
Yes, Mr. President, I'm just waiting for the language to come across to ensure that it is absolutely correct. It is, Mr. President. Thank you. Thank you. If I might read the amendment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. President. And this is the amendment to clause 14. In the new section 171, delete subsection 3 and substitute therefore 3. Liability under this section to meet the costs of medical care for sickness or injury and to pay wages in whole or in part in respect of a seafarer who is no longer on board shall cease on whichever is the earlier of A, when the seafarer has recovered from the sickness or injury, or the sickness or injury has been declared by a medical practitioner to be of permanent character, or B, the time at which the seafarer can claim medical benefits under a scheme of compulsory sickness insurance or compulsory accident insurance.
Does anyone wish the minister to read that note again? No?
What has changed is that 3A remains in its entirety, but B has been deleted. So another approach would have been to say that new section 171, 3B shall be deleted. But what has been proposed technically is the rephrasing of 3. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister, would you just hand the amendment to the clerk? Members would have heard the amendment. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 14 as amended. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clauses 15, 16, and 17. Those in favor?
Mr. Chairman, I just have one clarification on 15.
Sorry, 1 minute, please. Let me just start again. I put clause 15.
Okay, so Minister, just seeking clarification on 15.6, where it speaks to adverse work treatment and the fine there being $500,000. I was just trying to appreciate the definition of adverse and the calculation of the 500,000. Just trying to understand the amount that has been set.
Well, what I was indicating was that there will be a general review of all of the fines under this act. And the point of not accepting the previous one was because we would only be doing one, and we actually have to do all. So this is probably, I mean, like any other fine, there wouldn't be a specific formula for it. There's a broad scheme which gives an upper limit for the court to work within based on its assessment. So, and the term adverse would, of course, be construed in the context of, in its normal meaning, in the context of the circumstances here.
Thank you very much, Senator Morris. I put clause 15, 16, and 17. Those in favor? Aye. Ayes have it. I put 18, 19, and 20. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Ayes have it. I put 21, 22, and 23. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 24. Those in favor? Aye. Against? Ayes have it. I return to clause 2.
Thank you, Mr. President. I had in fact wondered whether this was such a circumstance. So in respect of the query that was made about the reference to resident magistrate, the Judicature Resident Magistrate Amendment Change of Name Act actually contains a general provision that requires the term resident magistrate in whatever enactment it is mentioned to be construed as a parish court. So it's already
Thank
under.
you.
Thank you very much. So I can put clause 2. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put the title and enacting clause. Those in favor? Against? The ayes have it. The question that I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 2 amendments. Those in favor? Against? I'm sorry, there's a query. Yes, I do report that the bill as having passed committee stage with 2 amendments. Those in favor? Aye. Against? I do report the bill as having passed committee stage with 2 amendments. Minister?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And again, I thank my colleagues, and I welcome this legislation, and again acknowledge the work of the Minister and his team, as well as that of the Maritime Authority of Jamaica, which is indeed the primary authority, the competent authority, and that body that has been managing so expertly our maritime affairs on the world stage. This is how it is that we were elected to the IMO, re-elected in 2015, and again re-elected in 2017, and continue to serve at the highest level of the Executive Council, Category C. Mr. President, it is not intended to do... Oh, I am asking, Mr. President. So it's not intended to do any further business, save to ask for 3rd reading of the bill.
Thank you. The question is that the bill be read for a 3rd time. Those in favor? Against?
A bill entitled An Act to Amend the Shipping Act, read a 3rd time and passed.
Minister, I'm sorry. I believe that Minister Samuda wanted to say a few words just before on the motion for the adjournment. That was referenced already. It's a matter that was referenced.
So, Mr. President, just wanted to acknowledge, because I wasn't in the chamber when we started this morning, the untimely passing of Constable Morrison. Senator Brown would have mentioned it, so I know both sides of the Senate agree and wish to extend our condolences to his family and to indeed the entire Jamaica Constabulary Force. It has been a difficult year for the Constabulary Force. We will keep them in our prayers, and I also wish, before closing, to plead with the public, all of us on the roads during this last couple of weeks of 2020, to take time. We really have had a rough year on our roads, and I think we need to really govern our speed and govern our behavior on the roads. But that aside, we extend our condolences to the family of Constable Morrison, and we will keep them in our prayers through the season. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. Samuda, Senator Samuda and members, you know, I had occasion to come in contact with that young man. I met him on a number of occasions because he works out of the traffic department and is oftentimes assigned to get persons from, as an escort, get persons from A to place A to B. And I must tell you that I was absolutely shocked at the photograph of him sprawled across the road in his dress uniform. It was really very painful to me. In any event, I did call his unit and offer our sincere condolences. May his soul rest in peace. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. President. On that somber note, and again, just to emphasize the call for all Jamaicans to take time, to be careful on the roads, you will get there in time, and just a little longer, but safely. Absolutely, you will get there in time. You will get there. To be 1 minute earlier, or to try to be 1 minute earlier, is not worth it. So we ask everyone to just take time in this season. And we, of course, convey our sincere sympathies and condolences to the family of Constable Morrison. Mr. President, it is not intended to do any further business. Might the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed?
I'm reminded by the clerk that Christmas luncheon is served downstairs, so we look forward, Madam Leaders, we look forward to having a refreshment downstairs. This Honourable Senate now stands adjourned for a date to be fixed.
All the time.